It also, I think, draws us further into the conflict, makes it harder for us to exit. But if Trump does not follow through, then it compromises our credibility. If we make a threat in no uncertain terms, in literally all capital letters, and we don't follow through, then we lose our credibility, we lose our deterrent threat, and that actually also makes it more difficult to exit the conflict if we're not able to bluff or deter Iran from continuing the conflict and the closure of the strait. So all eyes were on Trump on Monday. What is he going to do? Is he going to chicken out like he always does, or will he actually escalate the conflict out of impatience? Well, the answer came yesterday morning. We covered this last night. Trump said he would not follow through on the ultimatum because he said there is a peace process underway. This is news to everybody, including the Iranians. Trump said yesterday morning, I'm not going to follow through on the threat. I'm actually going to postpone the ultimatum for another 5 days. So he said it's not off. He said, I'm going to give Iran another 5-day grace for another 5 days. So he said speculators were pricing in that there was a relatively stable and calm situation in the Middle East, rather than expecting the war to escalate beyond everybody's control. So immediately people were skeptical and said, is this just a bid to reassure the markets, or is there a real peace deal? Well, there were reports yesterday that apparently there are some discussions happening behind the scenes. Initially, Iran denied that there were any talks, and their foreign minister came out and said, we are not talking to the United States, we don't want to talk, and we're not opening up the strait. But in a number of papers, they say that on Thursday there was an effort and an initiative by Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and other countries to bring Iran and the United States together for a bilateral negotiation in either Turkey or Pakistan this week. That was reported yesterday. And that report said that the Iranians were not happy that the existence of the talks was leaked. They are distrusting of the United States, but apparently there is some semblance of a negotiation going on. Well, today there's some news about these talks, and this is really definitive. This proves whether or not the talks are real and whether Trump's ultimatum was truly postponed because he believes in peace, or if he's buying time or reassuring the markets, or both. And the big development from today, we actually now know some of the details of the talks. And there's a couple of things. First of all, we have found out that there is some plan, some half-baked plan, to get Iran and the United States together in a room in the next 48 hours in Pakistan. On Thursday, they're planning for a U.S.-Iran meeting, and apparently they're going to have some negotiation. And that just sounds totally ridiculous. That is absolutely far-fetched. We go from, first of all, we are still bombing Iran all the time. And by the way, we're bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, which is a very big deal. But this weekend, we bombed Natanz, we bombed Isfahan, and Iran retaliated by bombing Israel's nuclear facility at Dimona. So the war is still in a very severe state right now. And they say that in 48 hours, there's going to be some grand negotiation. That's number one. Number two, we actually see the U.S. proposal for peace, and this is how you know the whole thing is fake. The U.S. has proffered to Iran, in the middle of all this, a 15-point plan. This is their proposal to end the hostilities. And the 15-point plan says, among other things, 1, Iran cannot enrich uranium on its soil. 2, they have to give up their highly enriched uranium to the United States. 3, they have to destroy their nuclear complex at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo. Additionally, it says Iran cannot have a ballistic missile program, and it says Iran has to stop all support for its proxies. Now, we talked about this yesterday. Iran has a proposal of their own, and it is the complete opposite of the U.S. proposal. Iran is demanding that they get reparations for the war. They want us to pay them. Iran says they want the United States to leave all its bases in the Middle East, and they want control over the Strait of Hormuz in perpetuity. They want to charge a toll on all the shipping and all the vessels that cross through the strait, and they're already doing that. They effectively already have that, and they want that to be the new normal. They want to collect a tax, just like Egypt does in the Suez, just like Panama does in the Panama Canal. So they could not be further apart from each other. And this is a story about the negotiations. This is from the Wall Street Journal. It says, quote, mediators from Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan are pushing to have a meeting arranged between the U.S. and Iranian officials in the next 48 hours, but both sides remain far apart. Iranian officials initially said they would be open for talks, but haven't given formal approval to a meeting in Islamabad. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, President Trump said Iran's leadership was under pressure to negotiate. He said Iran recently agreed not to have a nuclear weapon, although Iran has already made that its public position for some time. Meanwhile, Iranian officials told the mediators that they remain highly suspicious of the United States, and media leaks of the talks have angered Iran. The U.S. has sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war, which centers largely around previous Trump administration demands of Tehran. The document sent through intermediaries calls on Iran to dismantle its 3 main nuclear sites, end enrichment on their soil, suspend ballistic missile work, curb support for proxies, and fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In return, Iran would have nuclear-related sanctions lifted, and the U.S. would assist while monitoring the country's civilian nuclear program. The plan broadly reflects the U.S. proposal discussed with Iran before the war started on February 28th, when President Trump accused Tehran of not negotiating in good faith. Iran's new leadership says it now has higher demands of Washington, such as seeking reparations after weeks of attacks. So taking all of this together, we now know for a fact what is happening. It's all fake, okay? If you hear anything about diplomacy, peace talks, negotiations, it is all a ruse. And it is a calculated, deliberate deception, which is part of the war. And I said this yesterday, and I said this last week. We have to see whether Iran will make a deal, what their willingness is, what the U.S. proposal is. Now that we know the details, this tells us that the United States is not serious about peace. And all you need to look at, again, is the timeline, the history. So last year, Netanyahu comes to the White House asking Trump to bomb Iran. This is the express purpose of his first 2 visits. Netanyahu comes to Trump. He's the first foreign leader to visit the White House in the first week of February in 25 and says he wants Trump to bomb Iran. And Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, is lobbying him on behalf of Netanyahu to bomb Iran, and Trump says no. Netanyahu comes back in the second week of April, once again wants Trump to bomb Iran. And what Trump tells Netanyahu is that he's going to give peace a chance. He wants 60 days. He's giving Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. And he sends out Steve Witkoff and the other negotiators to Oman and various locations, Rome and elsewhere, to make this deal. And what are the U.S. demands in April and May of 2025? They are as follows. The U.S. was demanding no enrichment, give up your existing stockpile of enriched uranium, and you have to dismantle your nuclear centrifuges. And that was it. Those were the only demands. And specifically, during the negotiations last year, Iran only agreed to negotiate in the first place if the negotiations only concerned the nuclear file. And what I mean by that is Israel wanted a deal on proxies, missiles, and the nuclear program. 3 separate issues. Israel's pushing the United States, if they make a deal, to restrict Iran's support for its regional proxies like Hezbollah, the Houthis, the PMF, Hamas, also their ballistic missile program, the range and number of its missiles, and lastly, but most importantly, its nuclear program. Well, Iran wouldn't even agree to meet unless the first 2 were off the table. Iran says, we're just not entertaining that. We're not open to negotiating. It is our sovereign right to support militant groups in the region and our allies. It is our sovereign right to develop a non-nuclear strategic capability, which is its ballistic missiles. They said, but we will entertain a negotiation on the nuclear file and that file alone. And so that was a negotiation last year, and we couldn't reach a deal. Because fundamentally, Iran will never agree to no enrichment. They might agree to diluting their stockpile. They might agree to giving it to a third party. And they might agree to restrictions on the enrichment of uranium. But they're never giving up the technology, they're never giving up the infrastructure, and they're never giving up what they call the pride and the right of their nation, which is to have a native nuclear program, the ability to enrich uranium. That was the impasse. So in a word, it was an issue within an issue. They don't want to talk about the other 2 things, only nuclear. And within nuclear, the sticking point was they want to keep enrichment. When the 60 days expired, there was no deal. Israel made their move. The United States joined. And what seemed to be the case is that that entire round of negotiations was just a big trick. And Trump even said that. Trump said he knew Israel was preparing an attack, and maybe the United States was using those 60 days to get into position for that attack. So you got a couple of things going on here, which is one, when we negotiate with Iran last year, we only are concerned about enrichment capability. And 2, there's this pattern of us or Israel using us to use negotiations as a trick to get Iran to lower its guard, to buy time. This is cover for us to assemble a strike package, to assemble the force posture necessary to be able to hit Iran in the Middle East. And then, of course, all of this repeated last month. In January, there were these huge protests in Iran, and that followed a visit by Netanyahu to the Mar-a-Lago Winter White House in late December. Trump came out once again and said that Iran has a deadline. We're giving them a deadline of 10 days, up to 2 weeks, to make a deal. And just like last year, there were more rounds of negotiations. And just like last year, Iran said, we only want to negotiate on nuclear. They said proxies and missiles are off the table. And just like last year, you had a good first and second meeting where you talked about the framework of negotiations, and then things fell apart when the United States brought its list of demands. And just like last year, the same sticking point was enrichment. Just a week before the conflict broke out, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, they went to Switzerland, they met with their Iranian counterparts, and they said, look, here's the deal. You're going to give up enrichment, give us your enriched uranium. You cannot, it never sunsets. This is permanent, or else we're going to war. That was, I believe, days before the war started. Well, now the war has started. And just like last year, all along, while these negotiations were happening, the United States was moving 60% of its Air Force to the Middle East, moving 2 carrier strike groups to the Middle East, moving its troops out of the bases where they would be targeted by Iranian missiles and moving THAAD systems and Patriot missile batteries into place to defend the Gulf, U.S. military installations in Israel. So history repeats itself. Well, here we are now in what you could say is credibly the third round, the third stage of negotiations. And Trump says there's these intermediaries. It's Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey. They're working on our behalf. They're trying to get Iran to the table. And we have a framework, and here's our 15-point plan. So if history is our guide, what is going to happen next? Well, what happened last year and what happened a month ago is that we were never serious about peace because we're not going to come off of our red line. They're not going to. We're not going to. So it's pointless, and we know that. And they know that. So it's a dance. It's a charade. It's a trick. If history is our guide, then all of that is nonsense. And not only is it a trick, not only are they not serious about an agreement, but it's also probably giving them cover to escalate militarily, just like it was last year, just like it was last month. And we'll talk about what that is. We actually talked about it last night as well. But how do we know definitively? We know because of the substance of the proffer, the substance of the U.S. proposal. So if last year our demands were only a few nuclear things, and if last month our only demands were a few nuclear things, why now are we asking for everything? Now our 15-point plan says no missiles, no proxies, no nukes. In other words, like I said, it's a worse deal for Iran. We're asking for more, not less. We asked for only a nuclear concession both other times. Now we're asking for concessions on nukes, proxies, and missiles. Now, if Iran were on the ropes and they were looking for an exit, maybe that would make sense. In other words, if the war increased our leverage, then we could ask for more. Arguably, if the war increased our leverage, maybe we could get them to agree to what we were already asking for. But you would only be able to ask for more than you were originally asking for if the war in some way increased your leverage. But that didn't happen. The opposite has happened. The war has only increased Iran's leverage because Iran has demonstrated it is able, one, to keep its regime intact. They have suppressed all protests. There is no factionalism or division within the regime. The leadership has survived and are carrying out the struggle, and they are still able to launch drone and missile attacks against the Strait, against the Gulf, against the GCC, Israel, U.S. bases. And so actually, it is the United States that is looking for an exit. It is the United States economy which will collapse. Our economic growth is all being driven by data centers right now. And the data center demand is being driven by the AI bubble. It's all this compute that OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and Microsoft need. So when you look at economic growth and job creation, in the past year and a half, it's pretty bleak. It's all coming from AI, and it's all coming from data centers. And AI and data centers run on energy. Energy is getting very expensive, and it will be very expensive for a long time, and it will keep going up as long as energy supply is constrained by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So we are actually the ones that are looking for a quick exit. They have the leverage, not us. And they certainly have more leverage now than they did 3.5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. So if they have more leverage and we have less, then why are we asking for more? If we couldn't get an agreement on nuclear before the war started, or a year ago, why would we now get an agreement on nuclear and proxies and missiles when Iran controls the global energy supply and then therefore the global economy? Well, the answer is we can't. And what's more, to even suggest that that is what we are demanding is an insult. We are coming to the Iranians and we're basically begging them to end the fighting, and we're telling them, but to end the fighting, you need to agree to everything that we want. They already don't trust us because we pulled the rug on them. Both other times we tried to negotiate, And they hold all the cards. Why would they fight this hard to then give up everything that they got into this situation for in the first place? Which is their sovereignty, which is deeply connected to their strategic capabilities. They're not going to. So it's not serious. They're not going to get a serious meeting together in Pakistan, and they're not going to seriously consider this 15-point plan. And so this isn't happening. And the Iranian regime is saying, maybe there's something else happening in private with other representatives, but the parliamentary speaker, the foreign minister, the generals of the IRGC, they're all saying the same thing, which is we control the strait and we're never giving it up. And we have centrifuges and we're never giving that up. And basically it's a new status quo. So what we can determine from this is that why are we doing all this? What is the purpose of talking about peace talks? Well, this just verifies that this is a ruse to trick the markets and Iran. Why does Trump say they made a deal, they've agreed to give up nuclear weapons, and they want to talk, and they want to make a deal more than anyone thinks? It's a trick because there's trading going on right now, and they don't want the price of oil to keep going up. So during trading hours, during the weekdays, Trump says everything's fine, we're going to make a peace agreement. Then on the weekends, that's when he makes his moves. That's when the war started. That's when he bombed Karg Island. That is when he made his announcements about this 48-hour ultimatum. And the reason that he deferred the deadline of the ultimatum 5 days is because that is when he's planning to make his next move. So on Thursday, when these negotiations don't happen or they're not satisfactory, that gives him the window on Friday to either say, oh, the talks are going well, they have another week. Or the talks failed, now we're going to escalate. And I think maybe the timeline is not this weekend, but the following weekend. I think that maybe on Friday, Trump says we're going to give Iran another week because the talks are going so well and we want to make a deal. And what is happening in the background is that the United States is settling in for either a tactical blow against Iran of a different sort or a longer-term attritional war. And all you have to do is follow the logistics. Right now, you have only one carrier in the Middle East, the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is its oldest carrier. Its biggest carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, had to leave the Middle East and go to Greece because of some fire in the laundry facility, or so they say. So you got one of the carriers out of commission, it's going to be out for a week. Other big development, you've got a number of THAAD systems and other batteries moving into the Middle East from Asia and other parts of the world. And lastly, this is the big one, it was also confirmed today that an airborne unit is moving into the Middle East this week to reinforce a Marine unit that is already on the way, and they're going to arrive this weekend. And this is a story about that. This is also from the Journal. It says, quote, the Pentagon on Tuesday ordered a couple thousand paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division to deploy to the Middle East as President Trump declines to rule out putting U.S. troops on Iranian soil. U.S. officials approved written orders for soldiers from the division's 1st Brigade Combat Team and the 82nd's headquarters at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Many of the soldiers are part of the division's immediate response force, a unit that is trained to deploy on 18 hours' notice for missions as varied as seizing airfields and other critical infrastructure, reinforcing U.S. embassies, and enabling emergency evacuations. The Army deployment comes as 3 warships carrying 4,500 troops from the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group near the Middle East. That group includes the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit based in Okinawa, Japan, a specialized Marine Corps unit that includes 2,200 personnel, including an infantry battalion of about 800. Among the plans the administration is considering, according to officials, is a seizure of Karg Island, an Iranian island in the Persian Gulf, from which Tehran exports about 90% of its oil. So it seems that everything is moving into place where they're sending 4,500 Marines, 3,000 airborne soldiers, and they're going to try to take an island. And it's one of two things. They're either going to take an island in the Strait. Why would they take an island in the Strait? Because right now they can't move their destroyers into the Persian Gulf or the Strait. The destroyers are too big and too slow. They're going to get targeted with drones. So they can't move their destroyers, and they need some kind of a platform in the Strait of Hormuz. So maybe an island. Trump is talking about opening the Strait of Hormuz through military force. Apparently the Royal Navy from the UK wants to get involved. France is considering getting involved. Maybe because of the effects on European energy. Maybe because they saw Qatar, which produces 20% of the world's LNG, maybe they saw Qatar get hit in the energy war. And Europe knows that if it escalates into an energy war, they're going to face some severe energy shortages or very expensive energy. And so the alternative to Trump unilaterally escalating the conflict into a war of critical infrastructure, electrical grid, energy infrastructure, is to solicit and to recruit the UK and France to draft them into forcibly reopening the strait, sailing through there. Maybe Iran doesn't want to attack those ships to draw them into the conflict, and they pave the way for a small special forces unit to take over one of those islands. And then the United States can say that Iran did not force us out of the conflict by closing the strait. The United States can say, we now control the strait. We control all the vital checkpoints. We control the Panama Canal. We control the Suez. We control the Strait of Hormuz. We've ripped it from Iran, taken their leverage, and now we can withdraw with dignity. Now we've diminished the pressure against the United States, and maybe we can even carry out the war longer. We can increase the pressure on Iran now that we have a reprieve from the pressure on the global energy market. Maybe that's the play. And all this talk of a peace agreement is to buy time to send this inconspicuous unit into the region to do a very daring operation, and they're risking it for a tactical blow. Maybe that's what is going on here. Maybe that's the plan. And that's what's being reported. This is just in the New York Times. This is in the Journal. This is in the Post. This is what the Pentagon is telling us. It could be misdirection. It could be disinformation. But either they're going to take an island in the Strait, or maybe, and I think this is less likely, they try to take Karg Island. The difficulty is I don't see how you get to Karg Island without controlling the Strait first. Karg is 300 miles northwest of the Strait. And if you're in the Persian Gulf, you're in no man's land. Because Iran has 800 miles of coastline from which they can shoot shoulder-mounted rockets off of the bed of a pickup truck going 100 miles an hour. They can launch drones. They can launch other projectiles. And you can't bomb the entire coastline in every position deep into the interior. So if you're in the Persian Gulf, you're in no man's land. Maybe they try to control the strait, and then they make a move on Karg. Maybe that's the plan. But it seems that history is repeating itself. This is Trump's MO, which is to flood the zone on Truth Social and on Twitter, and even behind the scenes, to flood the zone with all this conflicting information. And one day he says it's going to go on forever. The next day he says we already won, saying he wants to make a deal, floating that other people are going to negotiate. And in the meantime, they're preparing to escalate, to de-escalate, escalating the fighting so that they can withdraw with honor, so they can withdraw with some concessions. Or they don't even withdraw, they keep the war going. The other side of this is that our other partners in the region, they don't want it to be done anymore. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they're now lobbying the United States to keep the war going. Initially, they wanted it to be over quickly, but now they see that as long as Iran has missiles, they are a long-term threat to the stability of the Gulf. And that is because as long as Iran can make missiles, then the Gulf is within range. And as long as the Gulf is within range of hundreds of drones and missiles, then they can never be certain that their non-oil industries, their non-oil economic sectors are going to be safe. The Saudis and the Emiratis are trying to reinvent themselves. They're trying to get away from oil, mostly the Saudis, less so the Emiratis. They're trying to build an economy that is based on tourism, capital markets, banking, finance. They're building these world wonders, building and bringing in all sorts of entertainment venues. This is why they're courting comedians and the WWE and F1 racing and all these different things. And so when Iran is bombing Dubai's airports and hotels and shopping malls and telling entire swaths of the city to evacuate, this is a threat to the long-term viability of the Emirates as a state and Saudi Arabia as a state. Unlike Iran, these are much smaller countries in terms of population, with a huge population of foreign workers. Now, they don't have much going for them besides the energy, which, if global trends continue, is on the downswing. It's going to cost less and